Hello, students. Welcome to the review for the midterm exam that I'm posting. This is going to be a brief video that goes through some of the materials that you should focus on regarding the midterm exam. I want to give you a few tips on studying for the midterm to be able to maximize your score and your ability to do well on it, and also provide you with some materials for you to focus on as well. As far as the exam rules, a couple of key rules here. First of all, the exam will be closed book and closed notes. That means no external help whatsoever, no notes, no nothing. You're taking the exam with your own capabilities. So it's very key that you don't post material, share material, or utilize the help of anybody else on the examination. Unfortunately, we have several people every class that get caught for doing this, and unfortunately we have to fail them and report them to the university, and nobody likes doing this. So make sure you do this yourself using your own capabilities, and do not use external tools to be able to take the exam. As far as the exam itself, it's going to be administered using the Respondus Lockdown browser. If you have not used the Respondus Lockdown browser before, I suggest that you get yourself familiar with that prior to taking the exam. We're going to be posting some information on Blackboard on how you can download the Respondus browser, and you should test it out and make sure it's working fully before the examination itself. Next, you're going to need a webcam. So you're going to need an active webcam and audio to be on to be able to have a valid examination. So we need your webcam and your audio to be on. If you take the exam without your webcam and audio, we will disallow your examination. So make sure that you have a webcam and audio. We'll also be posting for those people who do not have webcams and cannot get a webcam. We'll be posting ability for you to check out laptops in the Bauer College of Business that can be used to track your examination. I recommend that you get yourself a webcam. This is an online class. You'll be taking other online classes. So if you don't have one, you can get yourself an inexpensive webcam and make sure that you use it for your examination and your lockdown browser for this exam. You're going to need a student ID, a valid student ID, or a valid driver's license to be able to register at the beginning of the examination on the lockdown browser. So that's very important that you have that ready. So those are a few exam rules. Make sure that you follow them. This should be a fairly straightforward exam. My guess is that students do quite well on this, and there should be no reason for you to deviate from these rules. As far as the exam structure itself, it's going to be 50 questions on the exam. They're all going to be multiple choice questions. It's the whole exam. You'll be given 1 hour and 30 minutes to take the multiple choice exam from the start time. If you leave the exam during the exam will close out. So you have to do this continuously. It's not like the quizzes. With the Respondus Lockdown browser, you need a good, secure internet connection, and you need to start the exam and continue the exam wholly through the entire time until you're completed. So it's very important that you prepare yourself. Most people, I say, take a full 2-hour time period to get yourself ready, because and allocate yourself 2 hours, because it's going to take a little time to get on and get registered and get all your stuff ready at the beginning. And you want to make sure that you get the full 1.5 hours to do the exam. Should be plenty of time. The average person takes this exam in about 35 to 40 minutes. So 1.5 hours should be plenty for anybody to be able to take the examination. If you're a student with disabilities or work through the Student with Disabilities office, we are coordinating with them, and we have your materials, and we'll be working with them to be able to administer your examination for you. As far as the contents of the exam and the structure, it's going to be equally distributed across our 9 chapters that we've covered so far, and also covering the material on the very beginning, a couple of the intro trends. But I'll highlight that in a second for you, and I'm going to be posting a PDF of the PowerPoint that I'd suggest that you focus on for studying. A couple of the key tips for studying on this. Focus on your core focal areas of class coverage. What I mean by that is when I go through the videos and I post those PowerPoints for those first 9 chapters, really understand and know the material in those PowerPoints. The vast majority of this exam will come from the class PowerPoints. So about 80% and maybe upwards to 90% of the exam will come from the materials I've covered in my lectures and the class PowerPoints. If I spend a lot of time on it, it's very likely to be on the examination. Read your textbook. For those people who do the best on the exam, they go through my lectures, they read the textbook, and the other thing that they tend to do is they study the glossary. So the end of the textbook, each chapter is a glossary of key terms. They become familiar with those key terms. By being familiar with the key terms, you're familiar with all the content in all those chapters. So really focus on the PowerPoints as the key elements to know, but you can also read the material and watch my lectures. The glossary, again, is a very good strategy for being able to get yourself ready. So I've posted, I'm going to go through this rather quickly because I've already posted lectures on all this material, but I'm going to show you some of the key slides that I want you to focus on. Very likely there are exam questions on some of these key slides. I'm not saying that there won't be content from the other lecture slides and PowerPoint as well, but these could be some of the focal things that could be on the exam itself. So we did this introduction to trends session that was part of the syllabus. One of the things I talked about is the evolution of the changing times to the from the area of efficiency to the area of acquisition to organic growth. Be familiar with that. And some of the trends I talked about in that area as well. So these are a couple of key things I talked about the average company having more competitors. I talked about some of the market share being cut down for companies and customers wanting more data acquisition or data content to be able to review. As far as chapter 1 material, a couple of the key slides, and I realize I'm going through these quickly because you can actually watch my full lectures to get all the information on these. But on chapter 1, I talk about the marketing process. That's a really important one for you to understand. I talk about understanding the marketplace and customer needs, another important area. The designing a customer value strategy. And that's chapter 1. There's 3 core slides. You notice I'm really putting some core slides for you to focus on. I guarantee there'll be questions from these, but again, there's going to be questions from some of the other materials from the lectures too. But this will be focal content. As far as chapter 2 again looks at the company and marketing strategy. We talk about what is strategic planning. I talk about what is a market-oriented mission. I get into information about business versus marketing objectives and how they align. I talked about this in detail in our lectures. We talk a little bit about the business portfolio and strategic business units. You should understand what an SBU is. I talk about this matrix, which is the BCG matrix. Understand the BCG matrix and understand how to use it, very likely on the test. I also understand and talk about the marketing strategy and the marketing mix. Marketing mix is something we'll reflect on the entire semester. Important for you to know that. As far as chapter 3, this is analyzing the marketing environment. I want you to look at actors in the marketing environment. What are the actors in the environment? I described each of these in the micro environment. Who are these intermediaries and what are the roles of intermediaries? I might want you to know some examples. I've provided an example of this. The macro environment itself, what are the characteristics of a macro environment? And then I talk a little about in the macro environment about demographic characteristic differences. In fact, we spent a lot of time on this. I've used some questions in the past on this on our quizzes as well. As far as chapter 4 gets into managing marketing information to gain consumer insights. In this one, we talk about the managing of marketing information. This is very important for us to understand. But understanding the marketing information system, what does that mean? What is the marketing environment? How does it play into the marketing information system? This is one that I spent a lot of time in, is describing the difference between exploratory, descriptive, and causal research. Looking at things like internal data versus market intelligence and market research. And then we move to chapter 5, and this is consumer markets and buyer behavior. Here we talk about cultural, social, personal, and psychological and buyer decisions. Remember, this is at the consumer level, the individual consumer level decision making. I talk about how these differences play out in innovation across the innovation adoption time period in new products. And then we move to chapter 6. This is business markets and business buyer behavior. So remember, chapter 5 focuses on the individual consumer. Chapter 6 is the B2B consumer, the business consumer. Know the difference between the two. There's a little bit of difference between, we talk about the business markets, fewer but larger buyers, derived demand, inelastic demand, fluctuating demand. I may use any one of these terms. We also talk about buyer behavior and who is involved in the buying process. Who are these characteristic roles? Since it's not one person, it tends to be a group of individuals in the buying center. This is our major influences on buyer decisions. Just like we had the consumer, here's the business buyer, and it has a very similar environment. You should understand the environmental, organizational, interpersonal, and individual influences on the buyer. Moving to chapter 7, this is customer value-driven marketing strategy. In chapter 7, we talk about some really key principles in marketing: segmentation, targeting, differentiation, positioning. We talk about how we determine an effective segmentation strategy. We talk about positioning maps. It's very important to understand what is a positioning map and how do we use positioning in marketing. And then we move to chapter 8, which is building customer value. In chapter 8, we talk about our core customer value. We talk about the actual product and the augmented product, and this is all the elements that bring value to the customer. Okay. We also talk about the difference between a service and a good. What's the difference? What are some of the core elements that a service characteristic? We talk about intangibility, inseparability, perishability, and variability. Understand those terms. And then we talk about product and service classifications. What are the classifications of product classifications? And what makes a product fit into one of these classifications? This brings us to our final chapter, chapter 9 for the exam. In chapter 9, we'll be focusing on new product development strategy. This is ways to obtain new products. We'll look at should know the definition of acquisition. Should know new product development as well. You should be very familiar with the major stages of new product development. So if I ask about these stages and what is new product development and how does it work in a typical organization, this is a very important figure for you to understand. This goes into the concept of crowdsourcing. We talked quite a bit about crowdsourcing. I gave you an example of Lego crowdsourcing. You should be familiar with this. This could be an exam question as well. And then we also talked about the product life cycle and what are some of the different strategies across product life cycles. So this is, again, a very important concept for you to understand. So a couple key things for our midterm that I want you to review or just remember before this midterm. Number one, be sure to download your Respondus Lockdown browser. Again, you should become very familiar with this. This will be the only tool that you can use to take the exam. If you try to do it on a regular browser, your exam will not be accepted. So you have to do it on a Respondus Lockdown browser. So make sure you've downloaded the browser. You've become familiar with using the browser prior to the examination. You also need to make sure you have a webcam. For this class, it's really important that everybody have a webcam and a working webcam. You need to make sure you test that it's working properly, the audio is working properly. That will be critical for you to be able to submit a valid exam. You need a student ID or driver's license because at the very beginning of the exam, you'll be validated with that. Again, like I said, set aside some time to be able to validate yourself. You should keep a full 2 hours to take the exam. You probably won't need the whole time, but you might as well use the entire time if possible to make sure you do as well as possible. But you will need your student ID or valid driver's license. And then finally, a reminder that academic honesty is imperative here. I feel like people will do very well on this exam. The questions have been set up in a way that people should know it well if they have followed the content, listened to the lectures, studied the material I talk about, and really no sharing of content whatsoever. We track this. So we look at the sharing of content, and this will not be something that that goes well for people that share content. So please do not do so. Keep it honest, do a good job on this final examination, and best of luck for everybody. I think everyone should do well, and I'm enjoying talking to people as we move forward in the class. And I hope to see more people during office hours and discuss the course with them. Take care and best of luck.